Mother and infant vanished without a trace in the vast wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains, leaving behind nothing but questions and heartache. 5 years of desperate searching yielded no answers, until a shocking discovery beneath the floorboards of an abandoned cabin changed everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Thunder rumbled through the North Carolina mountains as Mary Johnson, a 31-year-old mother, pressed deeper into the dripping woods, her daughter Sarah cradled tightly against her chest. The forest, alive with the sense of wet earth and pine, felt both familiar and ominous. But Mary's heart was steady. She trusted her knowledge of every root and shadow along the trail. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, adjusting the small knit cap on Sarah's head as another distant boom echoed across the valley. The infant stirred but didn't wake, lulled by the rhythm of her mother's heartbeat and the gentle sway of their movement through the Appalachian wilderness. Mary knew these woods better than most locals. She'd spent countless hours mapping trails, documenting plant species in her field journal, and teaching herself the survival skills passed down through generations of mountain folk. Today's hike was meant to be brief, just a quick journey to collect the early spring herbs growing near the creek bend before the storm fully arrived. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she ducked beneath a canopy of ancient hemlocks. Mary pulled a weathered tarp from her backpack, creating a makeshift shelter against the trunk of a massive oak. She settled Sarah on her lap, smiling as tiny fingers reached up to touch her face. The connection between them was palpable, a silent understanding that transcended words. Back at the Johnson family cabin, Jennifer paced nervously as the afternoon faded into evening. Her sister was usually punctual, especially with Sarah in tow. "She knows these woods," Jennifer reassured herself, peering through rain-streaked windows at the darkening tree line. "They probably just waited out the worst of the storm." When Mary's partner called from Boone, Jennifer downplayed her concerns. "You know how she loses track of time out there. They'll be back soon." But as she spoke the words, a chill crept up her spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. By midnight, with the storm finally past and Mary still absent, Jennifer's worry crystallized into fear. She called the local ranger station, describing her sister's planned route and timeline. "It's probably nothing," she said, her voice betraying her rising panic. "But this isn't like her at all." Dawn broke with eerie clarity, the forest washed clean by the night's downpour. The search party assembled quickly, rangers, volunteers from town, neighbors who'd known the Johnson family for generations. They found Mary's backpack perched carefully on a boulder near the main trail, untouched and dry, as if placed there deliberately after the rain. Inside was everything she would have needed: water, food, first aid supplies, even Sarah's extra clothes and formula, everything except Mary and her daughter. The silence of the forest pressed in from all sides as Jennifer stared at the abandoned pack, her heart sinking with the terrible knowledge that something was terribly, inexplicably wrong. For 3 agonizing weeks, search teams combed the Appalachian slopes. Their voices echoed through the morning mist, calling names that only the mountain laurel seemed to hear. Volunteers from Boone joined park rangers, moving in organized lines through the dense undergrowth, their hope diminishing with each passing day. The only trace they found was Sarah's stroller, standing perfectly upright and mysteriously bone dry beneath a solitary pine tree, despite recent rainfall. The discovery made no sense. The stroller sat nearly half a mile from the main trail, in a clearing no mother would reasonably visit with an infant. "It's like they vanished into thin air," the search coordinator told reporters, his weathered face etched with confusion. The stroller showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of animal interference, just emptiness where a laughing child should have been. Jennifer Johnson watched from the sidelines, her nurse's uniform exchanged for hiking boots and a flannel shirt that had once belonged to her sister. Each day, she returned to her apartment in Boone with mud-caked jeans and diminishing hope. The practical nurse had always been the rational one, the sister who planned while Mary dreamed. Now she found herself staring at maps, tracing possible routes with trembling fingers, wondering where logic had failed her. The guilt came in waves. "You need time for yourself," Jennifer had told Mary over coffee just days before. "Sarah's old enough for longer hikes now. The fresh air would do you both good." She'd even helped pack the diaper bag, suggesting her sister take the Eastern Trail for its gentler slopes and stunning views. As autumn painted the mountains in amber and gold, the search scaled back. Locals still ventured out on weekends, calling through the trees, but official resources dwindled. Jennifer watched the forest from her window each morning, the mist rising like ghostly fingers between the pines. She started working double shifts at the medical center, finding comfort in the predictability of medicine when her personal life offered none. The forest seemed to close around the mystery, vines and saplings gradually reclaiming the search paths. Seasons changed, but Jennifer's guilt remained constant. She kept Mary's apartment exactly as she'd left it, children's books stacked by the rocking chair, tiny socks paired in the drawer. Sometimes she sat in the silent rooms, trying to hear her sister's voice beneath the hum of the refrigerator. "I sent them into those woods," she whispered to no one, the weight of those words becoming her constant companion. What had begun as sisterly encouragement had transformed into an endless nightmare that colored every waking moment that followed. 5 years passed like autumn leaves, each season adding new layers to the mystery of Mary and Sarah Johnson. The small town of Boone, North Carolina, never truly moved on. Their disappearance became woven into local folklore, whispered over coffee at diners, and taught as cautionary tales to children who ventured too close to the Appalachian trails. "The forest takes what it wants," elderly hikers would mutter, their eyes drifting toward the mountains that seemed to breathe with ancient patience. Some claimed to hear a baby's laughter carried on the wind near dusk. Others swore they glimpsed a woman's silhouette among the trees during summer storms. Jennifer Johnson had grown accustomed to the sideways glances and hushed conversations that followed her through town. The practical nurse carried her grief like a second skin, visible in the dark circles beneath her eyes and the red thread she now wore knotted around her wrist, an old mountain tradition meant to ward off loss. She had consulted local folklore, desperate for anything that might keep what remained of her family tethered to this world. "It's just superstition," her partner would say, watching Jennifer tie a fresh thread each month under the new moon. But Jennifer knew better. The mountains held secrets older than any written history. The Johnson family cabin stood empty, a silent monument to absence. Jennifer couldn't bear to sell it, nor could she bring herself to stay there. Instead, she rented a small apartment in town, close enough to the hospital for emergency shifts, far enough from the woods to sleep without dreaming of her sister's voice calling through the trees. Everything changed on a rain-soaked Tuesday in April. Robert Davis, a 36-year-old carpenter with deep roots in the community, had been hired to restore the decaying cabin near the trailhead where Mary and Sarah were last seen. The structure had fallen into disrepair, its wooden bones warped by seasons of neglect. "Just make it stable enough to sell," the current owner had instructed, handing Robert the keys with obvious relief. The carpenter worked methodically, replacing rotted beams and reinforcing the foundation. When he reached the back room, he noticed an unusual pattern in the floorboards, one plank slightly raised above the others, as if recently disturbed. Following his instinct, Robert pried it up with his crowbar. There, nestled in the darkness beneath the floor, lay a carefully wrapped bundle. The quilt was folded with deliberate precision, its faded patchwork design still visible despite years of darkness. As Robert lifted it from its hiding place, he felt an unexpected weight, as if the fabric contained more than mere cloth. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he placed it on the workbench. Something about the bundle felt sacred, preserved by the forest itself for this exact moment. Robert knew immediately who needed to see this. The woman with the red thread, who had never stopped searching. Inside, the quilt lay a sealed pouch, protected from the elements despite the years hidden beneath the floorboards. Robert Davis's hands trembled as he carefully opened it. The small group gathered in the cabin, holding their collective breath. The contents spilled out onto the weathered table, a baby's pacifier, its plastic faded but intact, a wooden rattle intricately carved with the word "ever," and several water-stained pages torn from what appeared to be Mary Johnson's field journal. This was hers, Jennifer whispered, reaching for the pacifier with reverence. And Sarah never went anywhere without it. The nurse's fingers traced the familiar shape, memories flooding back of her sister, patiently teaching the infant to accept the comfort object. Dr. Susan Brown leaned forward, adjusting her glasses as she examined the rattle. "The craftsmanship is remarkable," the folklore professor noted. "This carving style has deep roots in Appalachian tradition." Robert nodded, inexplicably drawn to the wooden toy. Something about its weight and design stirred fragments of memory he couldn't quite place. "It feels older than it should," he murmured. The most haunting discovery, however, was the journal fragment. Jennifer carefully unfolded the delicate paper, recognizing her sister's distinctive handwriting, despite the water damage. Most of the text had been rendered illegible by moisture and time, but one line remained crystal clear near the bottom of the page. "It's not lost. It's waiting." The words sent visible shivers through everyone present. Edith's son, who had accompanied them for the discovery, crossed himself quietly in the corner. "What does it mean?" Robert asked, his voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the cabin's gaps. Jennifer's world tilted on its axis. For 5 years, she had lived with the crushing weight of guilt, encouraging Mary to take that fateful hike, assuring her sister the trails were safe, even with an infant. Now those 4 words reignited something she had nearly extinguished. Hope. "It means they might still be out there," she whispered, clutching the journal page to her chest. The practical nurse spent hours examining each object, searching for meaning beyond the obvious. She held the pacifier up to the light, noting teeth marks that matched Sarah's emerging baby teeth. She ran her fingers along the rattle's smooth surface, wondering why "ever" had been significant enough to carve. These weren't random items abandoned in panic or despair. They felt intentional, carefully preserved. "These aren't goodbyes," Jennifer finally said, her voice steadying with conviction. "Mary left these as breadcrumbs, a map toward something unfinished." News of the discovery swept through Boone like wildfire. The items found beneath the cabin floorboards reignited conversations that many locals had tried to bury alongside their memories of Mary and Sarah Johnson. At the general store, elderly patrons recalled similar disappearances from decades past, while younger residents shared theories over coffee at the town's establishments. Dr. Susan Brown arrived 3 days after Robert's discovery made the local paper. The folklore professor from Appalachian State University carried weathered notebooks and a recorder, her eyes bright with academic curiosity as she examined the quilt and its contents. She handled Mary's journal with reverent care, tracing the water-stained pages with her fingertips. "These references aren't random," she explained to Jennifer, who had barely left the cabin since the discovery. "Your sister was documenting places that appear in Cherokee legends, spots where the boundary between worlds grows thin." The academic's voice dropped to a whisper. "Places where people have been known to cross over." Jennifer clutched her coffee mug tighter. "Cross over to where?" "That's what I'm trying to understand," Susan replied, adjusting her glasses. "These mountains hold secrets older than any written history. The indigenous people knew which groves to avoid, which hollows could swallow a person whole." Meanwhile, Robert found sleep increasingly difficult. Each night, he woke drenched in sweat, haunted by vivid dreams of shadowy forest groves and the sound of a child's laughter. The carved rattle's design, the word "ever," surrounded by concentric circles, appeared in his dreams with unsettling frequency. One morning, while organizing his workshop, the carpenter discovered an old sketchbook from when he was 9 years old. His hands trembled as he flipped through childish drawings until he found it, a pencil sketch of the exact same symbol carved on the rattle. The circles, the lettering, even the small notch in the bottom curve, identical in every detail. "I drew this 25 years ago," he told Jennifer that afternoon, spreading the yellowed paper on the cabin table. "How is this possible? I've never seen this rattle before in my life." Jennifer stared at the drawing, her nurse's pragmatism battling with the impossible connection before her. "Did you ever spend time in these woods as a child?" Robert nodded slowly. "My great-grandmother used to tell stories about these mountains, about children who wandered into certain groves and returned different." He traced the symbol with his finger. "I always thought they were just stories to keep us from straying too far." The professor leaned forward, excitement visible in her eyes. "This changes everything. Whatever happened to Mary and Sarah might not be an isolated incident. It might be part of something much older, something that's been happening in these mountains for generations." The nursing home smelled of antiseptic and forgotten dreams. Jennifer Johnson hesitated at the doorway of room 23, where Edith Martin sat gazing out the window, her 80-year-old hands folded neatly in her lap. The former cabin owner had been a fixture in Boone for decades, before dementia began stealing her memories like autumn takes leaves. "Mrs. Martin," Jennifer approached carefully, the quilt bundled in her arms. "I'm Jennifer Johnson. I was hoping you might remember something about my sister." Edith's eyes, cloudy with age but suddenly sharp with recognition, fixed on the fabric. "You brought it back," she whispered, reaching with trembling fingers. When the quilt touched her skin, Edith's demeanor transformed. She clutched the fabric, bringing it to her face. "The quiet baby," she murmured, her voice taking on an urgent quality. "She never cried, not once. The woman under the roots kept her safe." Her son David, who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped forward. "Mom, you're confused again. Let's not bother these people with stories." "I'm not confused," Edith snapped with surprising clarity. "I remember the storms, 3 days of thunder that shook the mountains." She sang to keep the child calm. Jennifer knelt beside the elderly woman, notebook in hand. "Please, go on. What woman? Was it my sister Mary?" "Under the floor," Edith continued, ignoring her son's protests. "Lullabies in the dark. I left food by the east corner. Never saw her face clear, but I heard them." David placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "She gets like this. Mixes up stories from when she was young with things she's heard." But Jennifer was transfixed, scribbling every word. There was something in the old woman's tone, a certainty that transcended her mental state. "The cabin was never just a home," Edith whispered, leaning closer to Jennifer. "It marks the way, always has. My grandmother told me, her grandmother before that." A chill crawled up Jennifer's spine as Edith's weathered hand gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Why, some places remember better than people do," the old woman said, her eyes momentarily clear as mountain water. "That's why they built there. That's why they always come back." Jennifer felt the air change around them, as if the nursing home walls had momentarily thinned. Edith wasn't confused. She was remembering across boundaries most people never crossed. "Your sister knew," Edith said finally, releasing Jennifer's wrist. She found the old ways. The forest doesn't take. It keeps. As Jennifer left, the nurse mentioned how unusual it was to see such clarity from Edith. "She hasn't been that lucid in months," she remarked. "Whatever you brought her must have triggered something important." Jennifer nodded, clutching her notebook. The boundary between past and present, between lost and found, suddenly seemed as thin as the pages between her fingers. Dr. Susan Brown hunched over Mary Johnson's journal in her cramped university office, her fingers tracing the faded ink patterns. The folklore professor had spent 3 sleepless nights decoding what appeared to be a blend of traditional Appalachian plant remedies interwoven with Cherokee protective charms. What initially seemed like survival notes revealed themselves as something far more deliberate, a road map. "Look at this," she whispered to Jennifer, who had stopped by after her nursing shift. Susan pointed to nearly invisible coordinates scratched into the margin beside a drawing of a peculiar 5-petaled flower. "And here she mentions the hush beyond the thicket 3 times. It's not random." Jennifer leaned closer, her heart quickening. "That phrase. Mary used it when we were kids. It was our secret place in the woods where sound seemed to disappear." Within the hour, Jennifer had called Robert Davis. The carpenter arrived still wearing his work clothes, sawdust clinging to his flannel shirt. Together, they gathered supplies and headed into the forest as afternoon light filtered through the canopy. "The coordinates lead to somewhere off the main trail," Jennifer explained, checking her device against Mary's notations. "About 2 miles northeast of where they found Sarah's stroller." Robert nodded silently, his eyes scanning the underbrush with unusual intensity. Since finding the quilt, his connection to these woods had deepened in ways he couldn't explain. After an hour of hiking, the forest changed. The birdsong that had accompanied them gradually faded until an unnatural silence enveloped them. No rustling leaves, no distant calls, just the sound of their own breathing and footsteps. "This is it," Jennifer whispered, her voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. But the hush. They stepped through a dense thicket into a small clearing where ancient oaks formed a perfect circle. The air felt thick, almost resistant, as if they were moving through water rather than air. Robert pointed to the base of the largest tree. There, half buried in the earth, lay a small stone pendant on a broken leather cord. Jennifer recognized it immediately, the protective pouch her sister had worn since childhood. With trembling hands, she carefully lifted it from the soil. "It's intact," she breathed, untying the weathered strings. Inside were dried herbs, sage, yarrow, and something unidentifiable, along with tiny bones that seemed impossibly preserved. "These aren't from any modern animal," Robert said, examining one. "They look like Carolina parakeet bones. They've been extinct for over 100 years." The air around them seemed to pulse, growing heavier with each passing moment. Jennifer felt the distinct sensation of being watched, of having crossed a boundary not meant to be breached. "We shouldn't stay," she whispered, carefully rewrapping the pouch. "But this proves Mary was here. She left this for someone to find." As they retreated from the clearing, the silence followed them like a shadow, a reminder that they had trespassed on ground where the ordinary rules of time and nature no longer applied. The camera traps Jennifer Johnson had set up around the cabin began capturing strange images during the 3rd week of surveillance. At first, she dismissed them as deer or raccoons triggering the motion sensors. But reviewing the footage on her smartphone one evening, her coffee mug slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor. "What is it?" Robert Davis asked, looking up from the floorboards he was examining. Jennifer couldn't speak, just turned the screen toward him. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a small figure, child-sized, blurred, but unmistakable. The timestamp read 3:27 in the morning. "Could be anything," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. Night after night, the cameras captured similar images. The figure never approached the cabin, just lingered at the forest's edge, watching. Sometimes it appeared to be holding something, perhaps a toy or a small bundle. The grainy quality made details impossible to discern, but the height and posture matched what Sarah would be now, 5 years after disappearing with her mother. "It's her," Jennifer whispered one night, tears streaming down her face as she reviewed new footage. "She's trying to find her way back." The practical nurse in her fought against such impossible hope, but the sister, the aunt, couldn't help believing. She began leaving small offerings at the edge of the clearing: a stuffed rabbit Sarah had loved, a battery-powered lantern, a blanket for the cool mountain nights. The items remained untouched, yet the figure continued to appear, always watching, always waiting. Meanwhile, Robert's work beneath the cabin yielded another startling discovery. While removing a section of rotted support beam, his hand brushed against something smooth and cylindrical, wedged between the stones of the foundation. "Jennifer, you need to see this," he called out, his voice echoing in the crawl space. She knelt beside him as he carefully extracted another wooden rattle, identical to the one found in the quilt, down to the carved "Ever" inscription. But this one was older, the wood darkened with age, a date etched into its handle, 1918. "How is this possible?" Jennifer breathed, taking the rattle with trembling hands. "I don't know," Robert admitted, wiping dirt from his palms, "but my great-grandmother would have been a child then, right around the time family stories say she vanished into these woods." That night, as Jennifer sat on the cabin's porch watching the tree line, she felt a strange certainty settling over her. The forest wasn't just taking, it was keeping, preserving, the same pattern repeating through generations, the same secret held in the ancient trees and whispered in the mountain winds. "We're listening now," she said softly to the darkness. "We're finally listening." Jennifer spent 3 sleepless nights in her apartment, surrounded by dusty boxes of Mary's belongings. Her fingers trembled as she connected Mary's old smartphone to her laptop, praying the battery hadn't corrupted the data. As a practical nurse, Jennifer was accustomed to patience. But this was different. This was her sister. "Please," she whispered, watching the loading bar inch forward. The device finally yielded its secrets. Among dozens of hiking photos and grocery lists was a folder simply labeled Sarah. Jennifer clicked it open and found several voice recordings. Most were mundane, Mary singing lullabies or recording Sarah's first babbles. But the final file, dated the day before they disappeared, made Jennifer's blood freeze. Mary Johnson's voice came through clear and unnervingly calm. "She's not afraid of the dark anymore." A pause. Then, "I think she sees things I can't." Jennifer played it 17 times, each repetition burning the words deeper into her consciousness. That night, as she finally succumbed to exhaustion, the phrase wove through her dreams, intertwining with the haunting melody their mother had sung to them as children, a simple tune about moonlight guiding lost travelers home. "It's the same lullaby," Jennifer realized upon waking, her pillow damp with tears. Mary was singing Mom's lullaby to Sarah. Across town, Robert Davis sat on his porch, sketching the wooden rattle in the glow of his lantern. The carpenter hadn't slept properly since finding the bundle beneath the cabin. His dreams were filled with forest paths he'd never walked and voices speaking words he couldn't quite grasp. "I think I'm losing my mind," he confessed to Jennifer over coffee the next morning. His hands, usually steady from years of detailed woodwork, trembled slightly as he pushed a worn family album across the table. "My great-grandmother Eliza," he said, pointing to a sepia photograph of a solemn-faced girl. "Family story says she wandered into these same woods when she was 8, missing for 2 whole years." Jennifer leaned closer, studying the child's vacant expression. "And when she came back, she wouldn't or couldn't speak about where she'd been," Robert continued. "Never spoke another word until her death, but she carved things, toys, rattles, little wooden animals, all with the same markings." He flipped to another page, showing a wooden toy with the unmistakable "Ever" carving. "Whatever took Mary and Sarah," Robert whispered, his voice barely audible over the cafe's ambient noise, "it took my great-grandmother too. The difference is, Eliza came back." Jennifer reached for the album with shaking hands, suddenly certain their separate family histories were merely different threads of the same ancient tapestry. Winter gave way to a restless spring in the North Carolina mountains. The air thick with the scent of sage and rain-soaked earth. The Johnson cabin seemed to breathe with the changing season, wooden beams expanding and contracting as if remembering all they had witnessed. Jennifer Johnson found herself pausing during her evening rituals, listening to the structure settle around her. "It's just an old house," her partner had insisted before leaving for a night shift at the hospital, but Jennifer knew better. The sounds weren't random. They followed patterns, like footsteps pacing behind her own, always a beat behind, never quite visible when she turned to look. One evening, as twilight painted the woods in watercolor blues, Jennifer stood on the porch watching mist curl between the trees. The forest seemed alive with whispers, carrying fragments of the lullaby her mother used to sing, the same one Mary had hummed to Sarah. She closed her eyes, the red thread around her wrist a comforting pressure against her pulse. Robert Davis arrived the next morning, his truck splashing through puddles left by the spring rain. The carpenter's face looked drawn, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting another night of troubling dreams. "I need to show you something," he said without preamble, leading her beneath the cabin where snowmelt had exposed new sections of the foundation. There, partially buried beneath moss and decades of sediment, lay a flat stone unlike the others. Robert carefully brushed away the remaining soil, revealing carved words that made Jennifer's breath catch. "Where I stop, she begins." "It's old," the carpenter said quietly, tracing the weathered letters, "but not ancient. Maybe 30, 40 years at most." Jennifer knelt beside him, her fingers hovering over the inscription. The phrase resonated through her like a struck bell, unlocking memories she hadn't realized she'd buried. Mary, standing at the edge of the woods, 5 months pregnant with Sarah, whispering those exact words while touching her swollen belly. "She knew," Jennifer whispered, tears threatening. Somehow Mary knew about this place, about what it meant. Robert nodded, his own connection to the mystery deepening. "My grandmother used to say something similar about these woods, that they held doors, not just paths." The discovery ignited a new urgency in Jennifer. If Mary had known about the cabin's significance before her disappearance, perhaps her journey into the forest hadn't been random at all. Perhaps she'd been seeking something or somewhere specific. As they climbed back into the daylight, Jennifer felt the weight of time pressing down. 5 years had already slipped away. How much longer would the forest wait before closing its doors forever? Edith Martin's frail hands trembled less these days when Jennifer Johnson visited. The elderly woman sat straighter in her worn armchair, her cloudy eyes occasionally sharpening with startling clarity. Today was one of those lucid days. "I remember the storm," Edith whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. 1972. But it could have been yesterday. The rain came down like judgment, hammering so hard I thought the roof would cave. Jennifer leaned forward, recorder in hand. "What happened during the storm, Edith?" "A woman was singing beneath the floorboards," the old woman continued. "Not hiding, no, she was waiting, cradling something small. The baby never cried, not once, even when thunder shook the walls. She sang that old mountain lullaby, the one about silver moonlight and safe passage." Edith's son, a nervous man with perpetually worried eyes, appeared in the doorway. "Mother needs her rest now. These stories upset her." "They don't upset me," Edith snapped with unexpected fire. "They're trying to be remembered." Jennifer stood her ground. The practical nurse in her recognized Edith's mental state was the clearest it had been in months. This wasn't confusion, it was revelation. "Please," she said to the son. 5 more minutes. She's the only connection we have." Reluctantly, he retreated, leaving the door ajar. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Susan Brown spread her findings across a cluttered table at the local library. The folklore professor had documented 17 sites throughout the Appalachian range, with carvings identical to the ever symbol on the wooden rattle. "Look at this," she told Robert Davis when he arrived. "This carving was found on Raven Rock. The design matches perfectly, but it's the date that's impossible. The carpenter squinted at the photograph. Etched beside the familiar swirling pattern was 2025, 5 years into the future from when Mary and Sarah Johnson had vanished. "That can't be right," Robert muttered, running his fingers through his hair. "I've verified it 3 different ways." Susan insisted. "The moss growth, the weathering patterns. This carving is decades old, yet it references a date that hasn't happened yet." Robert thought of his dreams, of the child-sized figure at the cabin's edge, of his great-grandmother's unexplained absence. "Time doesn't work right in certain places in these mountains, does it?" Susan shook her head slowly. The Cherokee elders called them thin places, spots where boundaries fold and time breathes differently. She gathered her notes with trembling hands. "Whatever happened to Mary and Sarah, I don't think it was an accident or a crime. I think they crossed somewhere they were meant to go." Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text from the professor. "Found something. Come quickly. Bring the rattle." The evidence was mounting. Something profoundly unnatural was at work in these ancient hills. Jennifer's relationship with her partner, David, had become a casualty of her relentless pursuit. Their apartment in Boone had transformed into a makeshift investigation center, with maps covering walls and journal entries spread across every surface. The strain showed in their increasingly heated arguments. "You need to let this go, Jen," David pleaded one evening, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's been 5 years. This obsession is destroying you, destroying us." Jennifer stared at him, clutching Mary's journal against her chest. "How can I abandon them when every sign points to them still being out there?" "Wouldn't you want someone fighting for you?" David's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I'm fighting for you now, and you don't even see it." That night, he packed a small bag and left to stay with his brother. Jennifer watched him go, torn between grief and the magnetic pull of each new discovery. Every artifact felt like her sister, reaching through time, grasping for help. How could she turn away? Meanwhile, Robert's restoration company had expanded their work to 3 other historic cabins in the region. What started as routine renovations had evolved into something more purposeful. His crew, initially skeptical, now approached each project with careful attention, documenting every unusual finding. Found another one, called Miguel, Robert's assistant, holding up a small cloth doll with intricate stitching from beneath the floorboards of the Peterson cabin. The toy's features were faded, but its similarity to the artifacts from the Johnson case was unmistakable. By the end of the month, they had uncovered 7 quilts with matching patterns, 4 carved wooden toys bearing symbols like the Eva rattle, and numerous bundles of dried herbs, all preserved in the hidden spaces of mountain homes built decades apart. Dr. Brown arrived at the workshop where Robert stored the findings, her eyes wide with academic excitement. "This isn't coincidence," she said, carefully examining a quilt that predated Mary's disappearance by 70 years. "These are markers of a pattern that's been repeating for generations." Jennifer spread the photographs across the table, connecting dates and locations. "My sister wasn't the first," she whispered, a strange mixture of dread and hope filling her chest. "And Sarah wasn't the first child." Robert nodded solemnly. "The forest has been taking them, or maybe keeping them, for longer than any of us realized." Jennifer traced the outline of a carved toy with her fingertip. "And if they were kept, not taken," she said, her voice steadying with newfound purpose, "then they can be found." Subtle changes crept through Jennifer's daily life. The whispers started on a Tuesday morning as she walked to her car, faint echoes that seemed to follow her footsteps across the gravel driveway. At first, she dismissed them as imagination, the product of too many sleepless nights poring over her sister's journal entries and the artifacts from the cabin. Within days, the sounds grew more distinct. Jennifer Johnson would be checking a patient's vitals at the clinic in Boone when she'd hear her own voice murmuring just behind her, repeating words she'd spoken moments before. Colleagues noticed her sudden, startled looks, the way she'd whip around to face empty corners. You need rest," her partner insisted during another argument about her obsession. "This search is consuming you." But Jennifer knew what she heard wasn't exhaustion. The voices were real, sometimes her own, sometimes a child's gentle laughter that sounded hauntingly like Sarah's. The woods surrounding the Johnson family property seemed to breathe differently now. The air hung heavy and electric, like the charged atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Yet the skies remained stubbornly clear. Birds would fall silent as Jennifer passed, resuming their songs only after she'd moved a considerable distance away. "Something's changing," she confided to Robert during one of their evening meetings. The carpenter nodded, his eyes reflecting the same unsettled awareness. He'd felt it too, the weight of watching eyes when he worked alone at the cabin, the sensation of time stretching and compressing without warning. Dr. Brown suggested these phenomena might be what folklore called thinning, moments when boundaries between worlds became permeable. The old stories mention signs, the professor explained. Changes in perception, familiar places becoming strange, voices crossing over. One Wednesday afternoon, Jennifer returned from her shift to find a small package on the porch of her house. No delivery vehicle had been seen. No footprints marked the damp soil of the walkway. The brown paper wrapping bore no return address or postmark, only her name, in a handwriting she would recognize anywhere. Inside lay a fresh journal, its leather cover unmarked, except for a small symbol that matched the carving on Sarah's rattle. Jennifer's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing page after page, filled with Mary's distinctive looping script. The first line stole her breath. "Years beneath the green. Here is how to open the way again." Jennifer read through tears as her sister's words explained an impossible truth. A path between worlds. A way to cross the boundary that had separated them for 5 years. The instructions were methodical, precise, and terrifying in their implications. The final page contained a warning. Only shared blood can walk this path. Only love can find the way back. Jennifer closed the journal, her decision already made. Jennifer Johnson marked the 5th anniversary of her sister's disappearance with a solitary pilgrimage into the Appalachian woods. The morning air hung heavy with mist as she shouldered her backpack, containing Mary's journal and the wooden rattle carved with "Ever." Each step she took mirrored those her sister might have taken years before, a parallel journey separated only by time. The trail felt alive beneath her feet. Jennifer paused at the bent willow, the first landmark in Mary's notes, running her fingers along its smooth, curved trunk. 5 years ago, Mary had stopped here too, perhaps adjusting Sarah's blanket or simply catching her breath before continuing deeper into the forest. "I'm coming," Jennifer whispered, her voice swallowed by the dense foliage. Further along, she discovered the glistening stones Mary had described in her journal, a natural formation that caught the morning light in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Jennifer knelt beside them, noticing how they formed a subtle arrow pointing toward the forbidden grove. No coincidence, she thought. Mary had left these markers intentionally. As she approached the grove, an unnatural silence descended. Birds ceased their calls, insects fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The practical nurse in her registered the strangeness with clinical precision, while the grieving sister embraced it as confirmation. This was the place where the veil thinned. Jennifer reached into her pocket, touching the red thread she'd worn since Mary's disappearance. With trembling fingers, she tied it tighter around her wrist, a talisman against whatever forces had taken her family, a lifeline to guide her back if needed. "I remember the lullaby, Mary," she whispered, and began to hum the melody their mother had sung to them as children. The notes felt tangible in the still air, vibrating with purpose rather than simply fading away. With each verse, Jennifer pressed deeper into the woods. The path seemed to shift and waver, landmarks appearing where none had been moments before. Time stretched and compressed around her, sunlight filtering through leaves in impossible patterns, shadows moving against the direction of the sun. Her heartbeat quickened, each pulse seeming to bend the world further. The trees grew older, their bark more gnarled, moss thicker upon their trunks. Jennifer recognized this place from her dreams, the ancient grove where reality wore thin. She continued singing, her voice growing stronger as the forest responded. The melody guided her forward until she reached a clearing bathed in twilight glow, though her watch insisted it was only midday. Jennifer stood at the threshold, knowing with absolute certainty that she had found the doorway Mary had described. "I'm here," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've come to bring you home." There, in the twilight glow, Jennifer saw a small hand reach from the shadows, fingers outstretched in silent greeting. The delicate fingers seemed to waver between substance and mist, belonging to a child who should have grown far beyond this size in 5 years. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the tiny birthmark on the thumb, Sarah's mark, shaped like a crescent moon. The lullaby that had guided her through the ancient grove now drifted on the breeze, notes hanging in the air like suspended time. A child's voice, Sarah's, whispered her name with impossible familiarity. "Aunt Jenny," it called, the nickname only her niece had ever used, spoken with the same lilting cadence that had marked her first attempts at speech. "Sarah," Jennifer's voice trembled as she took a tentative step forward. The practical nurse in her demanded logical explanations, but logic had no place in this moment. The red thread she'd worn for protection these past 5 years seemed to warm against her wrist, as if recognizing its purpose fulfilled. Behind the small figure, shadows shifted, and Jennifer caught glimpses of another form, taller, familiar in its movements. Mary's silhouette was unmistakable, though somehow both present and not, like viewing her sister through rippling water, tears streaming down her face. Jennifer realized she had crossed not just distance, but time itself. The forest's secret was not one of loss, but of passage, a place where love and memory could hold fast through the thinnest veil. The grove around them seemed to breathe with awareness, ancient trees standing sentinel over this impossible reunion. "We've been waiting," Sarah said, her voice echoing strangely, as if coming from multiple directions at once. "Mommy said you'd find us when the time was right." Jennifer reached toward her niece, fingers trembling. When they touched, a jolt of recognition passed between them, warm and electric, confirming what her heart already knew. This was real. This was Sarah. The professor's theories about folklore suddenly made perfect sense. These woods had always been a threshold, a place where the boundaries between worlds grew thin enough to cross. What locals had dismissed as superstition, what academics had categorized as myth, stood before her as truth. How? Jennifer managed to ask, her scientific mind still grasping for understanding even as her heart accepted what her eyes witnessed. Sarah smiled, a smile too knowing for a child who should be barely 6 years old. "Time moves differently here," she explained simply. "Mommy says it's like being in the fold of a blanket, while everyone else lives on the surface." Jennifer understood then what Mary had discovered, not a tragedy, but a sanctuary. The forest hadn't taken them. It had kept them safe, preserved in a pocket of time where the outside world's dangers couldn't reach. The truth unfurled like morning mist rising from the Appalachian valleys. Mary Johnson and Sarah had never truly been lost. They had been kept, sheltered within a fold of the ancient forest where time flowed differently. Within this otherworldly sanctuary, seasons passed in blurred succession, days stretching and compressing in ways that defied conventional understanding. Jennifer sat cross-legged on the cabin floor, surrounded by the artifacts they'd discovered, poring over her sister's journal by the warm glow of an oil lantern. The pages revealed Mary's desperate struggle to maintain normalcy in an abnormal existence. Each entry documented her fierce determination to keep Sarah connected to her identity, to preserve memories of their former life even as the boundary between worlds grew more obscure. "I sing our mother's lullabies every night," Mary had written in shaky script. I tell her stories about Jennifer, about home, about the world waiting for us. I fear she's forgetting. Yesterday she asked if the trees were our real family. The nurse wiped tears from her cheeks. Imagining her sister alone in that timeless place, fighting to keep her daughter's humanity intact while navigating forces beyond comprehension. The journal detailed Mary's discoveries, how certain plants grew differently within the fold, how animals behaved with unusual intelligence, how the light sometimes bent around corners it shouldn't reach. The locals knew, one passage read, Edith's grandmother told stories about the keeping place. They left offerings at the thresholds. They understood the bargain. Robert had confirmed this through his research, uncovering generations of similar disappearances, each followed by strange signs and artifacts. The patterns stretched back centuries, intertwined with Cherokee legends and settler accounts of people who stepped between worlds. The final entry in the journal made Jennifer's heart race. Written in steady, resolute handwriting, it read, "We are not afraid. When you feel the hush, follow the song. The way is open, but only for those who remember." Below these words, Mary had sketched a map with landmarks only her sister would recognize. The bent willow where they'd played as children, the stone that resembled a sleeping bear, the clearing where wildflowers bloomed out of season. This wasn't just documentation, it was an invitation, a lifeline stretching across the veil between worlds, a promise that reunion was possible. But as Dr. Brown had warned, such passages between worlds demanded payment. The folklore professor's research suggested that those who crossed might never fully return, forever carrying the mark of the other side. The way home existed, but at great cost, perhaps the very essence of who they were. Jennifer closed the journal, her decision already made. Some prices were worth paying. Jennifer Johnson knelt by the base of an ancient oak, her fingers trembling as she brushed away fallen leaves to reveal a small, flat stone. Beneath it lay a carefully folded piece of paper, a child's drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a canopy of trees. The smallest figure wore what appeared to be a red thread around its wrist. "Sarah," she whispered, tracing the crude lines with her fingertip. This wasn't the first sign she'd found. Throughout the grove, Jennifer had discovered tiny handmade dolls crafted from twigs and scraps of fabric, some tucked into tree hollows, others nestled between exposed roots. Each placement felt deliberate, breadcrumbs left by a child who remembered her aunt. One doll wore a scrap of fabric that Jennifer recognized from Mary's favorite shirt. Another held a miniature wooden spoon, reminiscent of the one Sarah had always insisted on using during mealtimes. These weren't random playthings, they were messages. "I am here. I remember. I am waiting." The nurse gathered each treasure carefully, wrapping them in a handkerchief. Time moved differently in this place, but Sarah's memories remained intact. Jennifer wondered how many years had passed for her niece in whatever fold of existence she inhabited with Mary. Meanwhile, 60 miles away at Appalachian State, Dr. Susan Brown stood before a hostile faculty committee. Her presentation boards displayed photographs of the artifacts alongside charts mapping temporal anomalies in the forest. "And these aren't coincidences," the professor insisted, pointing to the rattle's carvings. "The Johnson case isn't isolated. I've documented 17 similar disappearances dating back to the 1800s, all with identical patterns." Her colleagues exchanged skeptical glances. The department chair cleared his throat. "Susan, connecting children's toys to Cherokee legends is hardly scientific evidence. Your reputation, my reputation means nothing compared to the truth," she interrupted, gathering her materials. "People vanished. They left signs, and some returned." Later that evening, as rain pelted her office windows, the folklorist methodically photographed each new artifact Jennifer had discovered. She catalogued temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic readings, and audio recordings of the forest's unnatural silences. Her career might be crumbling, But Susan remained steadfast in her conviction that the Johnson story would validate decades of research. She placed a pin on her map where Jennifer had found Sarah's drawing. It aligned perfectly with 3 other historical disappearances. "The pattern is there," she murmured, "for anyone willing to see it." In the forest, Jennifer carefully replaced each artifact exactly where she'd found it. These weren't hers to take, they were Sarah's breadcrumbs, guiding the way home. As darkness fell, she reluctantly turned back toward town, knowing she would return tomorrow and every day after, until the way between worlds opened again. Robert Davis found peace in his dreams for the first time since discovering the quilt. Where shadows once terrified him, he now saw patterns, connections between past and present that felt less like hauntings and more like guidance. His hands, calloused from restoration work, seemed to know which boards to replace, which beams to reinforce, as if the cabins themselves were speaking to him. "It's like they're telling me their stories," he explained to Jennifer Johnson one evening, as they sat on the porch of the 3rd cabin he'd restored that month. The carpenter had begun documenting similarities between the structures, hidden compartments beneath floorboards, unusual carvings on support beams, and small trinkets tucked into wall cavities. Each finding echoed Mary and Sarah's story. In one cabin, he discovered a child's drawing from 1937, depicting a woman and small girl standing beside a tree, marked with the same symbol as Sarah's rattle. In another, he found pressed flowers identical to those in Mary's journal, preserved between pages of a Bible dating back to 1872. "They weren't the first," Robert said, spreading his findings across Jennifer's kitchen table. "The forest has been taking people, or keeping them, for generations, and sometimes they come back." His great-grandmother's story suddenly made sense. The woman hadn't simply vanished as a child, she had crossed over, just as Mary and Sarah had. Her silence upon return wasn't trauma, but protection of a secret too profound to share. Meanwhile, Edith Martin's son Thomas had undergone his own transformation. After years of dismissing his mother's ramblings as confusion, he now sat beside her bed each evening with a voice recorder, capturing every fragment she offered. "Her mother remembers more than I ever gave her credit for," Thomas admitted to Jennifer during her weekly visit to their home in Boone. "She's been trying to tell us about the forest her entire life." Thomas played recordings of Edith describing a young woman who appeared at their cabin during a thunderstorm in 1968, carrying a baby wrapped in quilts. The woman had stayed 3 days before walking into the woods, never to return, until Edith spotted her again, unchanged. 20 years later, "The forest keeps them," Edith had whispered. "Time moves different there. The old ones knew. They built the cabins as doorways." As spring deepened into summer, Robert connected with 5 other families whose histories contained similar disappearances. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, not to expose the forest's secret, but to preserve it, understanding that some mysteries were meant to be protected rather than solved. The past was no longer silent. It spoke through weathered wood, faded drawings, and the memories of those who had glimpsed beyond the veil. A chorus of voices pointing toward the ancient grove, where Jennifer now knew her sister waited. As the forest shifted from spring to summer, the air grew thick with memory and longing. Jennifer Johnson stood at the edge of the cabin's porch, watching the sun dapple through the ancient Appalachian trees. The restored wooden structure, once a monument to grief, now vibrated with an energy she couldn't explain but deeply felt. 5 years of searching had transformed the cabin into something else entirely, a threshold between worlds, where the lost could be kept safe until the time was right. "You feel it too, don't you?" Robert Davis asked, joining her on the porch. The carpenter's hands were stained with varnish, his connection to this place growing stronger with each board he restored. Jennifer nodded, clutching the red thread she still wore around her wrist. "The air feels different today, like it's waiting." Dr. Susan Brown had mapped the coordinates from Mary's journal, identifying the ancient grove as a place where, according to local folklore, the boundaries between worlds thinned during certain celestial alignments. Tonight was such a night, the summer solstice, when daylight lingered longest before surrendering to darkness. "I've left supplies at the grove," the professor said, handing Jennifer a small leather pouch filled with herbs, similar to those found in Mary's pendant. "If what Edith told us is true, you'll need these to find your way back." The elderly woman's words had become increasingly lucid in recent weeks. "The forest doesn't take," she had whispered during Jennifer's last visit. "It keeps, but only love opens the door both ways." As twilight approached, Jennifer hiked the familiar trail alone, carrying only what Mary's instructions required: the wooden rattle, a piece of the quilt, and her unwavering hope. The forest seemed to shift around her, paths appearing where none had existed before, guiding her deeper into the heart of the woods. In the grove, fireflies rose like stars from the undergrowth, illuminating the clearing with their gentle, pulsing light. Jennifer settled on a moss-covered stone, her heart pounding as she began to hum the lullaby their mother had taught them both as children. The melody drifted through the trees, carried by a wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Hours passed. The nurse waited, patient and resolute, as the boundary between worlds grew thinner with each passing minute. When distant footsteps finally rustled through the leaves, Jennifer held her breath. The air shimmered like heat rising from summer pavement, distorting the space between the ancient oaks. The boundary thinned, and she knew the moment had come, the chance to bring Mary and Sarah home. Jennifer rose to her feet, the red thread glowing faintly in the firefly light, as she prepared to cross the threshold that had kept her family from her for 5 long years. A small hand reached from the shadows, grasping Jennifer's with trust and hope. The sensation was both familiar and strange, the fingers smaller than she remembered, yet unmistakably Sarah's. Jennifer trembled, afraid to blink, afraid the moment would dissolve like morning mist if she dared to move too suddenly. The lullaby resumed, soft and familiar, as the forest held its breath. The melody floated through the ancient grove, the same tune their mother had sung to them as children. Jennifer recognized Mary's voice immediately, unchanged by the 5 years that had stretched like an eternity in the world beyond. "Aunt Jenny," Sarah whispered, her voice clear as a mountain stream. The child stepped fully into the fading light, no longer the infant who had disappeared, but a girl of 6, her eyes holding wisdom far beyond her years. She wore clothes woven from materials Jennifer couldn't identify, adorned with the same symbols Robert had found carved into the rattle. Behind Sarah, Mary emerged from between 2 ancient oaks, looking both older and younger than her years. Her sister's face showed no signs of hardship, only a serene understanding that made Jennifer's heart ache with questions. "Time moves differently here," Mary explained, reaching for her sister's hand. "What felt like forever to you was both longer and shorter for us." She gestured to the trees surrounding them, their trunks twisted in impossible patterns. "The forest doesn't take, Jennifer. It keeps." Dr. Brown's theories had been right all along. This place existed between worlds, a fold in reality where those who knew the way could step sideways through time. The professor would never publish her findings. Some truths were meant to remain in whispers and folklore. Sarah tugged at Jennifer's sleeve, her small fingers tracing the red thread tied around her aunt's wrist. "This helped us find you," she said. "It's like the one Mommy made." Tears streamed down Jennifer's face as she knelt beside her niece. "I never stopped looking," she whispered. Mary nodded, understanding flowing between them. "And Robert, he knows too, doesn't he? I felt him remembering." Jennifer nodded. The carpenter had recognized the pattern because it lived in his blood, just as it did in theirs. His great-grandmother had walked these same paths, had known the secret ways between. They weren't taken, they were kept, and now, Someone had opened the way back. "We can go home," Mary said. But the forest will always be part of us now." She looked down at Sarah, who nodded with solemn understanding. "We carry its protection." Jennifer took their hands, forming a circle that felt unbreakable. The boundary between worlds shimmered around them as they began the journey back, 3 figures walking through twilight, following a path that existed between heartbeats. Behind them, the ancient grove settled into silence once more, patient and eternal, waiting for the next traveler who might need keeping.